Well, hello everybody, or welcome back. My name is Steve Jeffrey. I'm one of the pastors here at All Saints Presbyterian Church in Fort Worth. This video is being created for the benefit of individuals who've expressed interest in the CREC Hotspot project, which we're going to talk more about in a couple of minutes. This is an initiative to encourage and facilitate the planting of CREC churches in areas where they don't have them. And if all of that seems just gobbledygook to you, probably means you've stumbled upon this video and don't know what it is, then please go to allsaintscirc.com/hotspot. allsaintscirc, K-I-R-K, one word, .com/hotspot. And there you'll read all about it. If you're interested, you can fill in the form there and register your interest. And in the last few days, really, last couple of weeks, we've set up a Google email group to facilitate communication between interested parties. And this video is a follow-up to a previous video in which we addressed some general principles that are important to follow when considering a CREC church plant. Here, what I'd like to do is to get into some of the more granular specifics, answer some particular questions, get a bit more nitty-gritty about the how-tos. And I'm here with my good friend Rob Hadding, who has a lot of experience as a pastor in CREC, and as we've assembled between us almost entirely by him a whole bunch of topics we're going to work through with the aim of trying to address your questions and hopefully help and support you as you're thinking about church planting in the CREC. Rob, do you want to just give us a quick introduction, reminder to the people listening who you are and where you're from?
Yep. Rob Hadding, pastor of Covenant Reformed Church in Sulphur, Louisiana. Been pastor for 20 some years, and most of those in the CREC.
Very good, very good. So we recorded a previous video. I'll link to that in the description of this one. We came off the recording of that, and I think it was pretty much immediately, Rob, that you said, well, I think we might benefit from recording another video in which we get more specific and granular with the questions. And I said, well, throw us some ideas, and you did indeed throw us some ideas. My contribution was to assemble them into some kind of order, which was pretty easy because they're kind of logical, they make a lot of sense. And one of the first things that you put on your list, and this is top of mind, was clarity of vision and telling the story. Talk to us about that, Rob, and what you have in mind there.
Yeah, so people want to start churches for a lot of reasons, and some of those reasons are really, really good. Some of those reasons are not. Sometimes people want to start a church, plant a church because they can't find anywhere where they can get along with other people. And so if that's why you're doing it, get that clarity and then stop. But if you have good reasons for planting a church, let's say that you are you're in agreement with the CREC's distinctives in terms of liturgy, paedo communion, postmillennialism, Christian education, those kinds of things, and there's not an option that that suits in your area, it may well be that this is a great idea. The idea of getting a clear vision is understanding exactly why you want to plant this church, and then being able to communicate why you want to plant the church. This is why this church is needed. It's not just that we don't want to be that church down the road. We want to start positively a church that has these distinctives, and we think that there is an opportunity to minister in this area in a unique way.
Right. Well, let's just double click on that for a second, because I think it probably is the case that in many cases, the positive and good desire for some of the CREC distinctives does at times correlate with perhaps a sense of hopefully sanctified disappointment or frustration with existing church options. So that's inevitable. But you said something else. Can't get along with others. So you're not just thinking, hey, listen, we've become Paedo Baptist, we've become convinced of Paedo Communion. We love our existing church. We just would like to see something that more closely reflects these things that we think are important. Yeah. You're thinking of something else. When you say can't get along with others, what have you got in mind, Rob?
Well, so there are all kinds of misanthropic people out there who just can't get along with other people, and they just want to have their own thing. They want to run their own show. If I was to have a church, it would be awesome. And so we're going to make a church after our image. And that's just a bad way of thinking. There are deeper things going on there other than the need for a church.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, one of the things I think it might be helpful just to point out then are some of the diagnostic tools, because I
Yeah.
don't know anybody who comes to me and says, you know what, Pastor Jeffrey, I just can't get along with other people, and I need a church that's exactly created in my image, so please would you help us plant one? Most people think that they can get along with others.
Right. That's right.
And so it's worth just a couple of diagnostics that occur to me, then feel free to add to them. One would be, how have your relationships been at the last church that you're at, or the last few churches you've been at? And if the last few have been quite a few,
Yeah.
that might be a red flag. I also particularly, and this is related, when people join us here at All Saints from other churches, we always contact their former churches just to make sure there's no mess that needs to be cleared up. And about 1 in 10 families or individuals or couples we send back. Not permanently necessarily. We don't say you can't come here. We say you can't come here like this because you're breaking what will be your membership pledges to live in holiness in all things and peace with all men.
Yeah.
We can't have you breaking your membership pledges in the process of joining by speaking ill of or slandering or leaving broken relationships at your previous church. So those are, like, if you've got broken relationships at the church you're currently at, there is some. It's not always the case that it's your fault. It's certainly not always the case that it's all your fault, but it's rarely the case that it's nothing to do with you.
Right.
It's quite unusual that a disagreement is 100% on one side.
That's right.
Sometimes it happens, but not always. And if it's happened to you a few times, that's something to look at. You've just got to be honest about that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And on the other side of that equation, so there is a negative side, but there also is the positive side. So we do have this vision. We do have this story that we want to tell. We have this thing that we want to create. We want to create this church. We want to build this church and plant this church. Being able to talk about what you're doing and why you're doing it is essential. So, there are a lot of ways of talking about this, a vision statement or an elevator pitch or something like that. Being so clear about what you're doing that you can say it succinctly and clearly so that people who are hearing what you're doing are not left with a bunch of question marks. It may lead to more questions in terms of digging deeper, but not, so are they trying to start a 7-Eleven? That kind of a thing.
Right. Another point that you highlighted, Rob, 2 or 3 bullets down in your list, a corollary perhaps of having the right positive vision is don't be afraid to say no. Lights draw bugs.
Yes.
So this would be the situation. Let me make sure I'm understanding it right, and then you speak to it. Let's suppose you've got this positive vision. You've not drawn up a mission statement for your church, perhaps, because maybe you think that's a little bit hackneyed, but you do have a statement, and maybe it goes along the lines of seeking to build a worshipping community that will shape every aspect of our culture within and without in line with the scriptures, or something like that. That just came off the top of my head.
Right.
But it doesn't seem to me like a bad idea. You've got that vision, and you're able to articulate it in a couple of minutes and give some examples of what you have in mind: Christian education and hospitality and fellowship and worship, which is joyful and yet serious. You've got all that stuff. Don't be afraid to say no. Means if somebody comes filled with enthusiasm and with a fistful of razor blades, that is to say, grievances that they picked up from somebody else, which they're squeezing so tight are hurting them that they won't let go of.
Right.
It's tough when you've only got 3 families and this looks like a 4th family.
Right.
But your advice would be what? Lights draw bugs, and therefore what?
Be prepared to say this might not be the best place for you. If you start off with these kinds of handicaps, so you've got somebody coming with a fistful of razor blades. If you start off having to deal with that, it's going to handicap the effort from the outset. you're always going to have to be dealing with that thing. Well, it's these three families, and then we got this family over here, and they're kind of a rough spot that we're just having to deal with, because it does a couple of things. First, it's going to occupy a whole lot of your time and energy, and that is precious when you're planting a church, and it also creates a barrier for people coming in, or people potentially coming in, to encounter razor blade guy. Well, is this what y'all are about? Now,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
as the church gets bigger, you can probably absorb a few razor blade guys, and it's not going to hurt you too much. But in the early going, especially, you want to be really careful.
Right. Right.
And so you want to be accommodating to everyone, but you also don't want to compromise the credibility of the group that you've got. You don't want to create unnecessary work for yourself, and being able to say no, is an important skill set.
Right. 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 So um, let's just dig in a little bit to that early stage community then.
Mm-hmm.
Intentional hospitality,
Yeah,
relationship building, community.
yeah,
Nobody is against hospitality and relationship building and community, I've
right,
noticed.
right.
These are hooray words.
Yes,
But
yeah.
you have in mind something quite specific about that, I'm sure. So talk to us about the place of hospitality, what you mean by it, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So at, at bottom, hospitality is being open, being welcoming, inviting people in, right?
Mm,
And to be intentionally hospitable means that you are creating opportunities for welcome. You're either having small events or get-togethers in homes or whatever it is, but those kinds of things on a regular cycle, as regularly as you can do it, being very intentional about it in order to have an opportunity to tell the story, to hear input, and um, create these moments where people can get to know each other, see who
mm.
else is there, kick the tires, smell the room, see if it's the kind of thing that they want to be a part of. Um, and if you're being intentional about it, then it becomes a part of the DNA of this group.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I just come back today from a lunchtime meeting with a couple who are considering joining the church, and one of the things that they actually asked me about was the welcome they might anticipate. Like, do you have a bunch of programs? They weren't particularly looking for that. Well, how are our children, 14, 12, 7,
Yeah.
going to meet friends and peers? And I actually said, look, I will tell you that I've found All Saints to be hospitable. We moved here 5,000 miles from England to join this congregation, from a congregation that we loved in England and still love. So, and I must have thought it was something good about it, but I'm not going to tell you that. If you need to decide for yourself, and in a sense, I'm putting us as a congregation on trial at that point, and I'm
Mhm.
very happy to do so. I think if we are not a hospitable congregation here at All Saints, then we have serious, urgent surgery to do, and uh, it's quite right that people who are considering joining us should forbear from doing so if we're not going to be welcoming like that. I think we are, but people will decide for themselves. But what you have in mind here, it is similar to that, but it's different in a way, isn't it? Because you're at this point, this is not a church,
Right.
so this is not a community where you have a degree of obligation as part of the body of Christ to welcome anybody who can, in good conscience, take your membership pledges. This is a group of people who are thinking about starting a church, and
Right.
what's going to happen is they're going to be the de facto, not necessarily leadership, but culture shapers.
Yeah.
And you might not thrive so well in certain circumstances with certain people, but then positively, if what you're doing is in these early stages, you're creating a culture. Maybe you meet once a month and you're having a meal together, spending time just hanging out, talking. Maybe you spend some time in prayer, singing some psalms.
Hmm.
You whatever it is that you do to create the culture that you want to endure. if that's the thing that positively draws the initial group, that will set the stage for the future. And that will become the character of your worship services
That's
and of
right.
your times of fellowship afterwards, right?
That's right. Yes,
Right,
yes, absolutely.
right.
And, so somebody said, I don't remember who said this, but somebody said that you can overcome a lot of the weirdness that goes along with being a CREC church if you're hospitable and if you're friendly. Um, so where if depending on the level of your liturgical um, uh, practices, for some people that's just going to be a weird thing to walk in and all this stuff that's in a very uh, thought out order, and it's the same week in, week out. It's going to seem kind of strange to them. The fact that you're baptizing babies might be weird for them. The fact that
Mm-hmm.
you're giving communion to small children could be very weird for some people. And so singing psalms, I mean, that's weird for a lot of people. A lot of the things. If you're hospitable and you show yourself to be normal, you're just people who are doing this thing. Then you stand a chance of overcoming some difficult things for some people early on.
Right, right. I think it's interesting here because what you're talking about touches on a danger that I think people coming into the CREC from outside can sometimes fix upon. What I don't quite know how to describe it. In the past, I've talked about the conservative fallacy, or maybe the radicalized conservative fallacy, where
Mhm.
the what happens is people make the assumption that whatever is done by the people who are most radically, uh, not necessarily fixated, most radically committed to a practice that's off in that direction, must be right. So here's an example you mentioned about liturgy.
Yeah,
If you're coming from a place which is like super low church, rock band and a TED talk, comfy
right,
couch, beanbag cushions for the youth group, all this kind of stuff, you come into the world of what has for the best part of 2 millennia been normal, which is to say a fairly formal, structured liturgical worship service. And you get to the CREC, you find a spectrum from actually quite chilled, plain clothes, structured but not particularly formal,
right.
to quite a long way up the candle. And some at All Saints, we wear liturgical robes on the Lord's Day. The pastors do, the congregation. I wear a collar on Sunday. Um, there are churches which are much more in that direction than us, with chanting and incense and processions
Yeah,
and other members of the congregation robed, other elders robed. Now, here's the assumption. The radicalized conservative fallacy is the assumption that whatever is furthest in that direction must be right. Right. Now, it might be that it's good. It might be that it would be really helpful in your context. But a couple of caveats. First, it might just be loopy.
right.
If you don't understand why you're doing what you're doing, and if nobody understands why you're doing what you're doing, it still might be right. Traditions
Yeah,
have that value, but you ought to try to figure it out.
right.
But secondly, the mere fact that we should beware of the pendulum swing. Okay, if we're coming from a kind of egalitarian, super informal, post-romantic, post-modern, charismatic context, we could easily swing right the way over here and make ourselves so weird for
Yeah,
reasons that we don't understand, but we're committed and convinced are normative. We
yeah,
can end up just putting people off because they think we're crackers.
right, right.
So I think that there's a couple of lessons here. The first is, of course, we want to be informed by a tradition that's more historic than 1967.
Right.
But then at the same time, uh, make haste slowly. Let's not fixate on and become obsessive about liturgical and musical minutiae.
Yeah,
Make the big things the big things. For example, bringing your children to the Lord's table. Okay, that's quite a big thing.
yeah,
That's quite a big deal. having a service of worship that involves the Lord's Supper every week, that has a confession of sin and multiple scripture readings, and a sermon that is taking seriously the Word of God, and singing that is robust and draws on hymnody from more than the last 50 years. Those are worth actually saying, no, we're going to do this.
Yeah.
But distinguish between those things and other stuff that for many newcomers is just going to look wacky and weird.
Right.
So thinking about that, we've got the vision. We have some sense of things of first importance and things of second importance. So the gospel, the CREC distinctives. And then we've also got a list of things of tertiary importance, which we might be interested in having a book group about in 5 years' time. We're not going to fight over. Well, that's all sorted out.
Right.
Nuts and bolts of setting up. Let's go live on Twitter and on Facebook and start sending Instagram pictures of Celtic crosses.
Right.
And let's go wild. In fact, we're again the culture, right? So I think we should probably start writing articles condemning our local city councillors, because that will get us some traction, won't it? In fact, negative news and a sharp conservative response to negative news and progressive wonkiness, boy, that stirs up things, doesn't it? So maybe we could get a name for ourselves, and all publicity is good publicity. So our plan, Pastor Hadding, is to kick hornets' nests until the place is abuzz with stinging insects, and then go around selling big cans of bug spray to anybody who's interested in joining us. What do you think to our social media strategy at this point?
So before there was the Twitter and the Facebook and all those things, there were letterboard signs in front of churches, where they would put up a pithy little thing and, try to make themselves relatable or whatever. Right. And the church I pastored before I came here, we had a hurricane and our sign got blown up. And so we were in the market for a new sign, and someone said, I think we ought to get a letterboard sign. And we could put, and I said, well, I'm not opposed to letterboard signs in principle. My only fear is that we might be tempted to use it. And so I think about social media a lot like that, because we can say things, we feel like we ought to say things, and there's not much of a filter, and we end up trying to outcute ourselves or to agendaize everything, and it becomes this really ugly and unhelpful place. That said, I have seen churches use letterboard signs quite well. They've used them with the right amount of taste and purpose. I think that you can and should use social media to do things, but it shouldn't be the kinds of things that you were talking about.
Right.
Let's go after the city council. Let's start a hate campaign against whoever we hate this week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think go on.
The use of social media is to communicate the vision of your church. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? And I think that you ought to be incredibly judicious about what you use social media for, what you say on social media, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't use social media copiously, right? Because reach and frequency is the old marketing formula. You getting your message out. So if you're putting things on Facebook, you should put things on Facebook. Probably showing my age because Facebook isn't the cool one anymore, but you should put things on there 3 or 4 times a week, and it should be quick. It should have a visual. Don't try to do long form stuff on social media, but get it out there, because you're creating these little points of reach where you're going to get more known, and it helps you get more traction in that particular platform.
Right. One of the things, this is just to be a little more granular on the social media thing, without going into too much detail. One of the observations that has been made many times now is that it's essentially decontextualized, in the sense that you might be speaking into a particular situation in your town or among your friends or among the community people that you know. But you have to be ready for it to be read by people who are not seeing it from that perspective,
Right.
and
That's right.
that can cause harm. So you can be being particularly taking a particular stance on a particular issue, which makes complete sense to people who just heard the sermon that you just heard,
Hmm.
but without that context, it just looks pointless or offensive or
Right.
provocative or whatever.
Right.
Now, so one of the tests you can do, then you reverse engineer that. One of the tests that you can apply to judicious use of social media is, how would you feel if this was the only thing that somebody saw about your church?
Yeah.
Now, it will likely be that they don't know everything about your church if this is all they see, of course. But would it give a picture of your church that you'd be happy for them to have in their head as a kind of big picture? So if it might be a sermon. If they listen to that sermon, is that are you going to be happy with that? It might be stuff about your upcoming monthly psalm sing. Are you happy with that being something in their mind? It's not comprehensive, but it nonetheless is a picture which they have every right, which they are certainly likely in some cases to treat as representative. So that, I think, constrains both the length, so people can't take little chunks out of context, and
Hmm.
then the content you might want to put there. There are times, and I know you know this, Rob, as a pastor, I found it myself. There are times where we have to say sharp things or things which out of context might seem provocative.
Yeah.
But those are best done either face to face with individuals or from the pulpit within a framework where you can give the context more fully
Yeah.
and establish what you mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. On the communication point, um, I my working assumption is that nobody listens to announcements given from the front of the church before worship services. I think that is an oversimplification to the point of being incorrect. It's not nobody, but it is the case that we can give announcements 2 or 3 times and follow them up with 2 emails, and people will still email the church office to say, "Hey, when is the next men's discipleship breakfast?"
Right. Right.
So, what have you learned any lessons about communicating and getting the message out and getting the message across to people?
Well, I know that we have a number of different communication avenues here at our church, and this still does happen that people just seem to not have heard the thing. I think that's just part of it. I think if you have a men's discipleship coming up, you say it on Sunday morning, you put it in the bulletin, you put it out in your weekly email communication, and then you remind them. You do that 2 or 3 weeks in advance. And if they still don't get it, well, okay.
Yeah, yeah,
I don't know what to do there.
yes, yeah.
But
But
just saying things as much as possible.
yeah, not being afraid to over communicate, to repeat
Yeah.
ourselves. Yeah, and
So I heard it. I heard an interesting thing. Somebody said, when you get tired of saying it, people are just starting to hear it.
right, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, we've been talking a good deal about the outward-facing approach to building a team, to establishing a vision, the kinds of activities that you might do in these early days. I'd like to say a word or two more about that. What kind of activities might you do? Point. But before we switch to that, anything else on the initial setting up, the nuts and bolts, practicalities of forming a group of people who are seeking to establish a CREC church?
No, nothing other than to say that we all have friend groups or people that we're in conversation with, and most of the time we're in conversation with people with whom we have some things in common.
Mm.
And so as 2 or 3 people who may not know each other apart from the group that we've formed through the Google groups, they start to get to know each other, then they can start inviting people in. And so what you're looking for in the early going is a core group of people, because in order to plant a church, you need people, you need a place, which can be a flexible thing, and you need a pastor, right? These are kind of like the 3 P's of church planning, and gathering the group of people who might be interested is one of the early important things. And so that's why being able to tell your story, being hospitable, using social media, setting up guardrails to have some mechanism to say, Billy's just kind of angry all the time. We don't think that that's really going to be a good fit. Doing those things and communicating as much as you can this thing is
Very important.
just a really important part of the early going.
Great. So I want to transition to talk about some of the mindset, temperamental factors which are going to be important in this core group, and particularly in the people driving it and the leadership within it, lowercase l leadership. Just on the way to doing that, we have alluded to, I guess, somewhat stereotypical, but nonetheless helpful ideas for the kinds of activities this core group might do together, just as they're getting to know each other and seeking to build community. A favorite is Sunday afternoon psalm sing fellowship meal. Sunday afternoon because it's Sunday, but it's afternoon, so it doesn't impinge on people's existing church commitments.
Right.
I want to suggest also, if you've done that for a few months, maybe you do it once a month and then you switch to once every couple of weeks, or even once every week. If you think that you're at a stage where you've got a decent sized group and it could grow if you're able to make a bit of a splash about what you're doing, get in touch with one of us or somebody else in your local CREC presbytery, and we can put you in touch with them, and ask for a minister from the CREC to come out and do a vision morning or like a mini conference. And I actually had a conversation just earlier this week with the pastor and another representative of a church that's wanting to do something like this. And we just talked through their local situation. It was different than the situation here. And we basically hatched, we sketched a 4-talk outline of a mini conference that they could invite friends and interested inquirers to. And the idea was it would have the effect of saying, look, this is what we're about. Giving the positive vision from the perspective of, in this case, it might be a CREC minister who's then able to answer questions that are more granular about the culture of the CREC. So that kind of vision day or conference, the regular psalm sing fellowship potluck. Rob, do you have any other thoughts about the kinds of events that you could encourage people to try as they're trying to build relationships?
Well, down here in Southwest Louisiana, a crawfish boil is always a great thing.
As I discovered a few weeks ago.
Yeah. It's whatever works in your context. I mean, if you're in a place where barbecue is a big deal, have a big barbecue. I mean, if you're just doing these kinds of things where you're putting out the banner, come see us, come visit us, come in a smallish way, come live with us for a while, and see what we're about.
No commitment involved. No need to sign up. And I mean, this actually touches on the stuff we discussed last time, which we won't cover again, about maintaining positive and friendly relationships with one's own existing church. Just to get cut to the chase on that, perhaps I could frame it like this. As soon as it gets to the point where a family is seriously considering the possibility of leaving their church, they should be talking to their pastor already.
Right.
And as you mentioned last time we spoke, Rob, it shouldn't come as a huge surprise to that pastor. If you have a good relationship with them, they might know already that you're into Christian education and homeschooling and the rest of your church is not. Or you're quietly in favor of paid communion, but you're graciously accepting that that's not what that church does. The pastor should already have that on his radar. And at a certain point, when a family says, hey, listen, we came to these last 2 potlucks, we actually love to take this further, for that family to say to their pastor, hey, we love this church, we want you to know we are considering joining a group with a view to setting up another church. Please advise us, tell us how you'd like us to approach this, anything you'd like us to consider. It is delicate, and let's try and retain friendships even while we may change churches. So mindset. Not everybody is cut out for church planting. I think I probably laid this on pretty thick during the last conversation, and again, I won't repeat that. Suffice it to say that It is a demanding, exhausting enterprise. I speak first-hand experience. I know you've got some
Mhm.
experience of this kind of ministry as well. Do you want to talk about the mindset that is going to be needed and the personal qualities that are going to be needed in the people who are driving this initiative, as distinct from people who say, put my hand up, I'd love to be a part of this, but I'm not going to be able to really drive the initiative?
Yeah,
What's needed?
yeah. Once a group has decided that they're going to pursue planting a church for real, um, having a sense of determination, like we're all in. So whether you have to decide who the front people are, who are going to be the people, the out front, the outward facing people. Um, those people need to have grit and determination and just a dogged commitment to the work of um, planting this church. It's just this entrepreneurial mindset. Like we're going to build this thing. Now, I know that the Lord has promised to build His church, but He doesn't do it by pixie dust. He does it through the efforts of people, and so not getting discouraged when things don't go your way, being patient. Uh, I like to think of church planting. We often think that church planting is about getting as big as we can as fast as we can, and I
Mm,
think that can be a recipe for disaster, because things that grow fast generally don't grow strong.
right.
If you want an oak, you want to be an oak tree, not a Bradford pear. You want to be a tree that just really has strength and roots and all the rest. And so being determined, but not being so determined that you're not willing to be patient for the
Mm,
right kind of building.
yeah, and it's worth pointing out at this juncture that the willingness to take on the role of, let's say, um, the guy who welcomes people to the meeting, or the host of
Yeah,
the regular potluck, or the one who's got the email account and the social media login,
yeah,
or the person who does a lot of the running. That's not equivalent to everyone else endorsing you as an elder. It
right.
might it might be that you are blessed with somebody in your group who is eminently elder qualified, maybe an elder already, and
Yeah,
has all those gifts. But we should tease those apart, because on the one hand, we don't want to put pressure on people that, well, if I handle the email account, does that mean I've got to lead this thing? We want
right,
people to be able to take on jobs that they're equipped for, they've got the gifts for and the determination without feeling a burden that is not appropriate. And at the same time, we don't want it to work the other way, where somebody thinks, well, if I can just get the Facebook login, then I'll be the pastor of this church one day.
right.
Um, the best way to appoint a pastor is not just to figure out who knows the email password.
Yeah,
Um, so uh, decouple those.
yeah,
And the implication of that for people who take on those positions of leadership is, especially as and when you appoint a pastor, expect your pastor to pastor you.
yeah,
And this is further down the road, but we had an experience here with a church that's going really, really well now. I know, Rob, you were involved in it to some degree as well, a significant degree. And one of the things that's made it go really well in the last few months is their appointment of a fantastic guy as the pastor.
yeah. That's right.
And he's had to do some things,
Yep.
and the vast majority of the congregation has embraced that, loved it, and that's the best that can ever happen, really. Where
Yeah,
the pastor comes along, he's 110% on board with what
that's
is going on, and the congregation is willing to say, well, pastor, tell us where we need to shape up, and you lead us now.
right.
So that's something to watch out for. And I will say I've seen things go wrong where you have somebody who clearly wants to be a pastor, or wants to be an elder, or his wife really wants him to be an elder,
Yeah,
and he thinks that he can probably grab the keys to the kingdom if he can just be the guy whose phone number is on the bottom of the flyer.
right.
And that is normally a recipe for catastrophe.
Yeah, right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Not everybody is likely to receive with glad and joyful hearts the news of a new church of any kind in their community. It's always tough for even a well-meaning, godly pastors and elders will be saddened by their church members considering leaving. Sometimes the reputation of the CREC, I think unfairly, in one or two doctrinal areas, has given even our Presbyterian brothers the false impression that we uphold doctrines which are not biblical.
Yeah,
Obviously, we have some disagreements on doctrine
sure.
with some of our Presbyterian friends. Paedo communion will be the key one,
Mhm.
but we are staunchly committed to the authority and supremacy and perspicuity and sufficiency of Scripture. But all that is to say, not everybody will be 100% excited about this.
Mhm.
So preparing for opposition, dealing with opposition, this is probably a recording all of its own. But let's try and speak to this issue. It could come from lots of different places, but most likely it's going to come from people with what they genuinely feel are legitimate concerns from other churches nearby. Maybe the churches you're leaving, maybe other churches in the town. So where do you want to start with this, Rob? Do you have any initial thoughts how to deal with opposition to the enterprise?
So the first thing is just be committed to your vision, right? We believe this is true. If we're backing something or if we're a part of something that we think, well, I like a lot of it. I don't really like most of it. When opposition or resistance comes, that person might not have the grit to keep going because it's just too much. So be committed to the core principles. Be committed to the reason, to the vision, to the story that you're telling. Be committed to it, and once that's settled, um, in your mind, you probably have already dealt with some of the arguments against what you're doing, right?
Mm.
So when you're coming to the position of paedobaptism or paedocommunion or postmillennialism, which is contrary to what a lot of people grew up with, or those kinds of things, you've had to work through the opposition to those things because you've had those opposition to yourself. And so when it comes to things theological, you're able to say, well, I've already dealt with this. I know that they're not going to like it for these reasons. This is where we are. This is where we're going to stay. And so that's that. So that's one thing. When people oppose you on doctrinal reasons, then you've got that settled. The other kind of threat is other people might see you as an existential threat to their church, like you were saying. You might siphon off people. What kind of church is this? That kind of thing. And the best thing to do is the same thing: be committed to what you're doing, why you're doing it, and have thick skin. Just know that opposition will come. Opposition doesn't last forever, generally, or it's going to come from different directions at different times. All of these things are just part of the thing. In no good story does the protagonist not encounter difficulty, right? That's just the way that it goes. That's the way it works in this world. You're going to encounter opposition, so anticipate it, and when it comes, give thanks to the Lord for it. And Doug Wilson once said that God gives us all these things and he expects us to turn kingdom profit with it. So figure out how to cash it, how to turn it into kingdom profit. This is for the good.
Yeah.
Sometimes those attacks will end up being personal because people don't win on doctrinal grounds. They don't win on these other grounds. So they can come at you personally. That's probably the most difficult one. You can talk about my ideas all day long, but when you talk about my mama or my sister or my wife or me, now it's something else. Yeah. Sticks and stones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to throw a couple of other thoughts out and look to hear your reactions to them. I think I'd like to encourage people to balance two seemingly opposite but actually complementary dispositional factors. The first is an absolute bullheaded, resolute commitment. Like, we are not asking for your permission.
Right.
We are seeking to plant a church. Now, that does require submission to somebody, and in the CREC, it requires submission to your presbytery.
Right.
So you can say, I'm not a lone ranger. I'm not going to be just going off and establishing this church out of nowhere. We're going to be in submission to our denomination.
Yeah.
But I'm not asking for permission from the church that might be opposing us.
Right. Right.
And I think this seems like it's intention, but it's not. That absolute cheerful, bullheaded commitment, we're going to try and do this thing, can then flourish alongside tremendous patience, being willing to start from the beginning every time somebody asks you the same question. And just to put this in concrete terms, we had our own version of the federal vision controversy back in the early 2000s in the UK, and for all kinds of reasons, I came to be accused of believing all kinds of nefarious things, some of which I'm very sure nobody in the history of the universe has ever believed. I'm sure nobody thinks they become elect because of their baptism, but also things which I certainly don't believe. I was accused of denying the doctrine of justification by faith alone and a whole bunch of things. And one of the things that took the most patience was when, the 6th or 7th or 8th buddy from seminary asked me the same question. Jeff, is it true that you X? And you realize people are kind of talking about you behind your back, and to have the same patience with the 8th guy as you had with the first guy. Not to react after you've explained this 15 times with the exasperation that you might reasonably have if you'd explained it 15 times to the same person, right? And just to be willing to go back to basics and say, no, I absolutely affirm the doctrine of justification by faith alone. I believe, like I know you believe, that genuine faith is evidenced in good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. And that's what James is talking about in James chapter 2. But in no way does that contradict Paul. I mean, we feel like we're doing Theology 101 at this point. But our friends, brothers and sisters in Christ for whom Christ died, haven't been thinking about this for the last 2 years.
Right.
They've just heard that, wow, you're leaving a church and you're going to join the CREC. We heard terrible things about them. It's like, well, you may have read all kinds of things on the internet. You never learned. Nobody ever learned decent theology on the internet. What do you want to know? Let me try and reassure you. I'll recount one really encouraging conversation. We had a lady join us here at All Saints from an OPC church, and she said, when you call my pastor, you'll discover that he's a little bit hesitant about me coming here. And he was. And we talked for about an hour and 3/4, just me and him on the phone. He's in another state. And, by the end of it, I had not persuaded him to change his mind on anything. I've not even been trying to persuade him to change his mind. And I think, if I recall, he would still say, no, I wouldn't express myself in the same way that you do in relation to certain matters. But he could see that I didn't believe all the nefarious and horrible stuff that he had been led to believe that people like us believe.
Yeah.
Right. And that was just tremendously helpful and encouraging. It meant that for the sake of the lady who was joining our church, he would write a letter for her, commending her to us. And the transfer of membership took place as graciously and peaceably as their constitution allowed. They couldn't actually transfer her membership because we're not in NAPAR. But it was a really wonderful conversation, and with a man who I'm sure I'll meet in glory if I get a chance to see him, because I'm sure he may well be half a mile in front of me in the stadium. I'll be way behind him. Just a lovely guy with whom we have some disagreements.
Yeah.
So I guess that's what I'm talking about. And it would have been easy, and it was a temptation. I'll confess, for me, it was a temptation just to think, good grief, are we still having these ludicrous
Yeah.
misunderstandings
Yeah.
thrown at us because of some report that some people wrote 20 years ago? And the answer is, yeah, we are. And so we need to pick up the threads and patiently, graciously work through things with people.
Yeah. Yeah. You use the word cheerful in there, and I think that that is just such an important word. Like when we have conversations with people that don't agree with us, we should want to be as cheerful with them as we would want them to be with us. Have cordial, cheerful, happy disagreements. Um, uh, I just can't say enough for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really helpful. Organized but not rigid. What do you have in mind? That's one of the things that you've highlighted for us to think about.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
So organization good, rigidity bad. We kind of. I've known several people in my life who this kind of goes back to what we were talking about before. They had an idea of the way it ought to be, and they set about arranging everything so that it met their own expectations, and anything that deviated from their expectations were suspect, probably heterodox, and disqualifying from the kingdom. And so we ought to be organized. We ought to know what we're doing. We ought to do what we're doing intentionally. But we ought not have things. Our shoelaces, to quote Randy Booth, our shoelaces ought not be so tight that we can't uh, uh,
Walk.
be open to people. So yeah, so tight we can't walk. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. I think that goes to things like um, structure of times together. It will start to turn into the culture of your church community and the way you worship. I want us to start worship on time. I do not want us to be dawdling until 10 minutes after the hour or whatever.
Right. Right.
But at the same time, if we run over by 5 minutes because a guest preacher or perish the thought, one of the resident pastors might have gone on a bit long. I think most people are quite forgiving, and we can
Right.
chill about that.
That's
There's lots of other ways that works out.
Yeah.
Speaking of pastors, who should do that job?
Yeah, somebody who's qualified to be a pastor. So a lot of times, well, I don't know about a lot of times. I've seen it happen on more than one occasion where you get this young guy. He's 23 years old, 24 years old, wants to set the world aright under his own steam, and thinks he ought to be the pastor. And the older I get, the older I think the entry age for pastoral ministry should be. I'm now at the point where I think you should be 60 to be a pastor. I
How old are you?
I'm
I wouldn't ask how old you are.
59.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you just not somebody who just wants to be a pastor, but somebody who's got the pastoral gifts, somebody who's had those gifts confirmed, somebody who's educated to be a pastor, somebody who is convinced, and others are convinced for him that he belongs in pastoral ministry, along with having the kind of outward facing gifts that one needs to be a church planting pastor, because it is a unique skill set. So if you've got a guy who is an incredibly gifted scholar, somebody who is brilliant but is an introvert, can't communicate with people, doesn't just generally get along with people very well, he's probably not your guy. So it's a guy with pastoral gifts and also the added layer of the entrepreneurial chops.
Yeah. I would say that's so crucial for being a church planter. Being a successful church planter is a generalist job.
Yeah, that's
Actually,
right.
to a large extent, being a pastor is a generalist job, but it's
That's right.
all the more so. The smaller the church is, the more a generalist you need to be.
That's exactly right.
So we have 2 pastors here now at All Saints and a pastoral assistant, so I can afford to be incompetent at almost everything I do. But which is wonderful, because the other 2 men are just absolutely fantastic. So, you do need a generalist. Actually, he needs to be able to preach. He needs to be able to do counselling. He needs to be a people person. He needs to be organised.
Yep.
He needs to be able to. You're probably not going to have a church administrator, so he needs to be able to produce your order of worship, or you need to find somebody else in the congregation who can, and he needs to be able to communicate with them. And
Yeah,
for all these things, it's head chef and chief bottle washer all at the same time.
that's right. That's right.
Um, and I will say, this is an issue within the broader denomination as well. I know you're aware of this, Rob, but you have served, and I am serving on the board of the Reformed Evangelical Seminary, which is an online seminary that is mainly focused at MDivs for CREC pastors. And we have a great crop of guys, and I'm optimistic in the next 2 to 5 years that we'll be turning out a dozen or two fantastic candidates for pastoral ministry. So that's one place to look, and you can find us at revseminary.com or revseminary.org. I'll check that. But while I'm checking that, hold on, revseminary.com. That raises a question. I mean, we're 6 families, first instance. We can't afford a pastor. Can we survive without a pastor for a year or two until we get some savings together and grow to a point where we can afford one? Is that doable, Rob?
Yes, yes, it is. So there are some things that you may have to sacrifice early on. So let's say that you've gotten yourself to the point where you've got 6 or 8 families. You're not yet financially able to support a pastor, although you see those days coming. It may be that you have to get creative with preaching. It may be so. Uh, 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 Churches sometimes will have videos of other.
About a month ago, I listened to a sermon from Pastor Booth on forgiveness.
Oh, hang on, something.
That's you.
That is
so
me.
So practical and broadly relevant that I knew right away that I'd like to cover this topic next time.
That's not me. Somebody, I don't know what I hit my keyboard on accident, and something started happening there.
So now we all know what you were listening to before we went live on this conversation. That sounds like a sermon. I didn't recognize the voice, but somebody had. Anyway, we digress.
Somebody had sent me a sermon, asked me to listen to it, so that's what it was.
All right, okay, good. Well, that sounds like a great sermon, so I'd love to hear that. But you were saying, which sounds even greater. So we're talking about this question: is it possible for a church to survive without a pastor for a couple of years while they get their cash together, or they find a pastor?
Yep.
And you're saying yes, but some sacrifices. Listening to a video of what?
Yeah. So watching a video of a sermon that somebody else preached, having guest pastors come in. It may be that you're not in the situation where you can have the Lord's Supper each week. That's an infrequent occurrence. But those are the price to pay to get to where you want to go. So it may not be perfect in the early going, but we're not aiming for perfection. We're doing what we can as we can, and I'd say that grinning and bearing it and finding joy in it. Today we're closer than we've ever been to having a pastor on the ground with us.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And similar questions, although different in some respects, around the selection of elders.
Yeah.
There are some apparent constraints which are removed, of course, because you might think, well, you don't need to have an MDiv to be an elder. And hey, look, we all love John, and he's been here since the beginning, and he's older than us. He should be an elder.
Yeah.
And that last bit might not follow, right?
Yeah. So elder selection, particularly in church plants, can be really tricky because it's possible, maybe even likely, that you don't have seasoned guys that are there, which is where the presbytery comes in. If you've got a sponsoring church, the sponsoring church can be your overseeing session. So you've got access to that when you're in mission status. It is helpful to keep in mind, I think, that elders do not have to be perfect men. They have to be godly, capable men of leading the church. And not every elder is suitable for eldership in every church, right? So if you've got a church that's 40 people, 60 people, in a small part of the town, you're out in the twigs or something, and it's just, it may be that a man can be on the session of that church, whereas he wouldn't be at a 500 member church where they've got a larger pool of better qualified, more capable men, right? not all elders are created equal, but you don't want to say we need elders, and so what's the best we got, right? We all like Timmy. Timmy's a good guy. We trust
Throw him up there.
he's going to be smart. He's been here from the beginning. Timmy, you're an elder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a delicate balance. I think one way to deal with it is to recognize it is much easier to ordain somebody than to unordain them.
That's right.
In fact, unordain, I'm not even sure is a thing.
Yeah.
But the serious point behind that is to say, much better to say, okay, we will appoint a temporary steering group with responsibility to oversee this group, this community, for the next year.
Yeah.
And then we will revisit it. And we'll revisit it before that if we get to the point in discussions with the presbytery when they're able to advise about steps forward. So what you're then trying to do is you're trying to create a framework which is forwards compatible into denominational structures that you want to move into.
Yeah.
Rather than saying, yeah, well, guys, we already appointed elders. They're these two guys. And the presbytery looks at them and says, well, this church looks fine, but the elders don't look qualified. Now what do we do?
Yeah.
And then nobody wants to offend anybody, but you've then created a sticky situation and an embarrassing position for those men.
Yeah.
So much better to say, look, we don't know what we're doing. We don't need to have the formal structures yet. Let's have a temporary steering group who will take interim responsibility.
Right.
On that note of CREC compatibility, you said a moment or two ago, sponsoring church, overseeing session, mission status, although you said status. And all those three are technical or semi-technical terms common in CREC discussions about church planting. And what they highlight is that we do have structures within the CREC to move people along and to help people along. We're actually in the process of considering more structures to do that. So again, this speaks to that issue of don't get ahead of yourself, over your skis, before talking with your local presbytery, because they will likely be able to advise you, okay, no, don't call yourself a church yet. Don't appoint elders yet. Do this. We'll send somebody once a month to lead a service with the Lord's Supper.
Yeah.
Do that for 9 months. Come to our next presbytery meeting, and then we'll take the next step. Those kinds of things, they can help you. They can help you with constitution, so that when you adopt a constitution, it's going to be compatible with the CREC. They can help you with doctrinal standards. Don't just pick your favorite evangelical confession because it might not be one of ours.
Right.
Again, taking advice and the willingness to listen to an abundance of counselors will help you walk in wisdom in those kinds of areas.
Yeah. And very, very specifically, when it comes to planning a church in the CREC, our governing documents are really clear and just quite helpful in helping to establish churches know how to proceed with their plan. So if they're a plant from zero, finding a sponsoring church as early as you can, as soon as you can. You don't want to just put on Facebook, hey, we're hoping to start a CREC church, Geronimo, amen, here we go. You want to have a relationship with a sponsoring church or someone, or there's, a couple of different processes available to do that. That is going to be your guidance, and use the governing documents to help guide your way.
Yeah. And I will say that there are different presbyteries in the CREC. Different presbyteries might have different informal modes of operation.
Sure.
That shape their judgment about whether a particular church is a good idea or when it might be appropriate to receive one into candidate status or mission status. Be ready to work with that. Recognize also that sometimes, and we've done this, I can say this publicly because it's a public matter. As a church here at All Saints, we didn't sponsor a church that's almost on our doorstep, and the session down Sulphur in Louisiana did sponsor it simply because we lacked the capacity to do so at the time. We were running to stand still. Rob Hadding is omnicompetent and can do 50 things at once, all while juggling on a unicycle. And so they took on the sponsorship of that church. And God be praised, it's been wonderful since they took it on. I nearly said since they let go of it. And that's just an illustration of the fact that there is some flexibility in the CREC structures as well, which can sometimes be deployed advantageously to help these initiatives get off the ground. Even if the local church can't help, there may be another church somewhere that can.
Yep. And presiding ministers are part of their job is to help be a clearinghouse for that and help point in the right direction. So make use of the local PM.
All right. Okay, we've talked for an hour and 5 minutes, which I think is quite long enough for anybody to listen to me, and they might want to hear more from you. So tell us if there's anything else you want to leave people with, Rob.
No, I think we've covered it. I mean, I want to be very encouraging to anyone who is considering starting a church in the CREC, planning a church in the CREC. I think the CREC is a wonderful denomination. We're not perfect. We got, pimples and warts just like everybody else, but it is a wonderful collegial denomination. It's a very unsilly, very serious denomination that has a whole lot of fun. And I just think that I think every church should be in the CREC.
Someday it will be, although it might not be called the CREC at that point.
That's right.
Yeah, I want to leave you with a word of encouragement, if you can stomach 30 seconds more. Last Sunday, so as we're recording this is 25th of June, so 3 days ago, All Saints celebrated their 17th anniversary. 17 years ago, on the 22nd of July, 2008, was our first ever service. And there are still here in the congregation members of two of the initial families who were there. It was a small service, and Pastor Randy Booth preached the sermon. Elder, one of our elders who's still serving as an elder, was installed, having previously been an elder elsewhere. And here we are, one church plant, 900 services of worship, and two congregations on a Sunday morning later. God has been very kind to us, and that's what the Lord can do. Never overestimate what you can do in a year. Never underestimate what God can do in 5.
That's right.
All right. Thank you all. The Lord bless you. Thank you, Rob, for joining me, and bye for now.